Welcome to the Minotaur's Maze. Today, I'm joined by a necromancer and somebody who invented witch-accelerationism and goes by the name of Black Pope Vice. Black Pope, thank you for being here and welcome.
Hello. It's nice to be here. I really I like joining on podcasts, and I saw this podcast and I really like the idea of like what this practical idea of like let's make metaphors, and we pick a particular metaphor, in this case the Minotaur story, the labyrinth. It's like that's good. It reminds me of it's kind of, it brings about discipline
Appreciate
at
that.
looking towards problems, and I think it's creative, and creative discipline really works.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I mean, just to kick this off, and I always like to start off with this question. Just give us a quick overview and a bit of a background about yourself, what you've been through, and how you've got here today. And maybe quickly explain, in the metaphor of the Minotaur, some of the Minotaur challenges that you faced on your journey.
So I think that, like a lot of people who have gotten into some sort of larger than life situations, is they were motivated by friendship or love. And I think I would say both of those motivated me to get to this point and look into things. And what I do, I would say, is primarily, as much as I like to use the Necromancer title because it describes, I guess, a larger extreme of what's possible, even though I would say fundamentally most of my duties, I'm a witch doctor. I come up with tonal technology. So the idea of, like, how we have radios?
Yep.
Well, things vibrate and they produce frequencies, and you can combine this language of runes, and it's a song language, and you can put them onto crystals and you amplify and produce unique healing frequencies, and you can do stuff with this. It's a slow term healing, but it does have a lot of beneficial elements. Like, I haven't figured out diabetes, but I'm helping someone with autoimmune deficiencies, heart issues. There's a lot of concerns about what's going on with the vaccine. And part of my argument is that if it works, which I think it does, it can have some people, they produce toxic levels, or they're more susceptible to spike proteins, and that's a big issue. Like, even if they're just exposed to it, I'm sensitive to it myself, and so is my girlfriend. So I would say most of my duties are with healing, though I can do, exorcisms and capturing of wild entities, and they're disembodied intelligences. So people have said they've seen physical entities. I've never had that experience. I deal with primarily spirits. Not that I disbelieve them or not. I just never had an experience where I could say, I saw a unicorn.
Okay.
Or like a goblin or something.
Yeah.
Or people seen, like, things like goblins, more likely. Or Bigfoot even. I've not even seen Bigfoot.
Yeah, I mean, before we get into all of that, like, I just want to get a bit of background. Like, how did you get started in this? Like, were you always interested in this and then just get started?
No, I was not. When I was 19 years old, my friend had an out-of-body experience, and for whatever reason, I found out stuff was real, but I was just like, it was just like you, it was just a hobby. and it was just something to be interested in rather than do.
Hmm.
Um, and I had a girl who I liked who was interested in just some side aspect of fantasy magic,
Hmm.
and I looked into it and I was like, oh wow, yeah. So I can see how you know, people like werewolves and vampires, like that trope. She liked this form of undead wizards.
Right.
Yeah. So when I found out magic was real, I was like, oh, I bet um um becoming an undead wizard is a real thing too. Because for whatever reason, I definitely believe um vampires and werewolves are real.
Okay.
I do think a lot of them are dead though.
Hmm. Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think religious organizations, especially the Catholic Church back in the day, through their many organizations, did go out and hunt these things down. So,
Okay.
and
So
that's not really the point
yeah, yeah.
of
Go on, carry
like,
on.
that's not really the point of the church. So it's like they don't talk about it too much.
Okay. Okay. So I mean, you've opened up a nice kind of rooms there. So, like, according to you, then, what is magic? What is your definition of magic?
Um, this is a really hard, complicated question, but I think the best way to understand it is that reality, when things change in the environment that are radical, it doesn't somehow erase older principles of physics that kind of just continue to linger on. When we look at all these mythologies, there's a period of consciousness and pre-consciousness. Consciousness has a lot to do with the material world being more than just like fantasy football or fantasy baseball stats. But in pre-conscious reality, there was an ecosystem of data swirling around. And I think this is where the principle of these disembodied intelligences or spirits can use physics to exist in our current environment. And when we talk about magic, we're talking about ultimately recognizing there is more to physics than 18th century, 19th century enlightenment materialistic perspectives on what being is.
Hmm. 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 Okay, so when you obviously started your study in magic, and obviously you're more into it now, like, what is the purpose behind it? Like, what is your purpose behind doing it, and what is the purpose of life? Like, obviously, when we talk about religion, it gives people a guidance, a framework on how to live life. And then depending on how spiritual you are, it's about spiritual ascendance, and then moving on to the afterlife. But what is the purpose of magic, and what is your mission in doing what you do?
Um, People have different ways of looking at it. I would say it's a lifestyle choice. I
Hmm.
feel a lot of people, it depends on how people want to take it as a lifestyle choice.
Hmm.
Um, some people have, you know, I would say it's ultimately a tool, and in that sense that how people use this tool in their life or as an accessory in their life changes. So some people, they do it and they keep to themselves and they don't ever really talk about it, and you don't know about that about them. And then um, other people, I guess more like myself, um, we use these online personas as a separate entity than ourselves for this. Um, and I'd say it's real. It's real, but it's
Hmm.
just a separate part of, like, for instance, I also write, and I have a writing name for that.
Right. Okay.
Um, but not to say that what I do here is any less, like, for instance, my normal personality, for instance, I will talk about, um, you know, healing technique or I guess more advanced stuff, I would talk about maybe history relating to why I think intelligent disembodied intelligences are the way that they are. Um, my mission with all of this, I guess, is I'm just a guy, you know, trying to change things, but also ultimately it's like, it's just this is a way that I can do something that's fun and it makes money and it's helpful.
Okay,
And
so is it not like a way of life religion kind of for you then, or is it just more of an interest hobby which you really like, but then you go and do other things when you're not really practicing it?
um oof, I would say it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
But there's times like I just don't want to, like with I guess writing, I like to keep the idea of um clear what I would say is a clear theology as opposed to action or alchemic research. Because that's ultimately all what all of this is alchemy in the sense that we are trying to change objects through will.
Okay, so let's stick to that point then. Obviously, alchemy, traditionally, alchemy is obviously, you get the example of turning lead into gold. And then you
Hmm.
hear about spiritual alchemy, which is basically, doing certain practices to basically purify the soul or ascend the soul. So, what do you mean by alchemy on a practical level where a layperson can understand?
So alchemy is fundamentally about the process of transmutation. You want to have this means of transmuting one thing to another. And how this manifests depends on what you're working on, but people want to see practical, real stuff. So what I recommend people doing if they want to see this with crystals, I have a specific crystal to recommend, but it doesn't work great with all crystals. But there's an apatite crystal, Apatite, and its chemical composition is like 80% of our skeletal structure.
Hmm, okay.
So yeah, it's the same chemical. Um, if you take CBD butter, cannabis butter, and it
Hmm.
doesn't need the THC, it's the CBD that does this.
Okay.
And you rub it on the outside of the apatite crystal. You're gonna watch the color of the crystal deepen and the crystalline surface to unify. And this will be a permanent change. And like you can wipe the CBD butter off the crystal and the color will remain the same. So it deepens. Other crystals um, aesthetically change, but not to the effect that it works with appetite. But I think it's very interesting to think about how this crystal that reacts very strongly to CBD is in our bodies.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
and bones are very important,
Yeah, of
not
course.
just because they hold us together.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, we're going to move on to obviously how you use crystals, and especially, we had a brief
Mm.
exchange on Twitter the other day. But for those who don't understand the language or who are new to this, what is a necromancer, and what exactly is witch accelerationism?
So, necromancers do all sorts of things with death energy or the dead. I do not um talk to human dead. I don't do anything with that. Some people do stuff with that. I've talked to my grandpa one time, but otherwise I don't, raise the dead to question them, which is traditional stuff. Um, what I do, and it's been a little while, but it's something I know how to do, is there's ideas about reincarnation and things like that, and I don't know what to truly think about that.
Mhm,
But I
mhm.
think when we die, we have unresolved desires and lusts and things like that that go out into the world, and they go into deer. And I think this explains why people experience reincarnation better than actual transmigration of the soul, is that how reality works with satisfying lusts. Because this is we're talking in Abrahamic, like I'm a Christian.
Okay.
I look weird and funky, but I believe in a fundamental Christian paradigm.
Okay. Okay.
So there's a fall, there's a Christ, you know, looking at the free will matrix from this perspective explains why things are the way they are is the best, in my opinion.
Okay. And just quickly explain which accelerationism before I have a follow-up question on basically what you just said there. But if you just go through that first.
It's just the simple idea that capitalism is facilitating um economic alternatives. And I think a lot of what witchcraft does is provide, some people might just only be able to do the placebo effect, but if they can do the placebo effect effectively with healing, that's a lot cheaper than, you know, some of the things the pharmaceutical companies offer. Not all, in my opinion, not all problems can be solved. Like, for instance, sometimes when you have an infestation of bugs or rats or something, you can try killing them, but if something's bringing them that location that's energetic, then how do
Mhm.
you deal with that?
Yeah.
Just, you know, and most of history, when we really think about it, functioned from this perspective. Our period in time has been very short where we did not think these things seriously. And I think, I'm not sure exactly what the end outcome will be, but I think that there's just going to be within our lifetimes a very open recognition of what crystals do, that there are spirits, um, and the economy is going to react accordingly. And I think when we look at places like ancient Egypt, how they lived was not so radical from us.
Okay, so a few questions in all of that. So to start off with, then traditionally, when you talk about necromancy and witchcraft, it's normally opposed to religion. So when you say you're Christian, I find that very interesting because the typical view would be that Christianity is opposed to this kind of stuff. So how do you kind of balance that out in your own thinking?
Um, hmm. I think that what I do is not specifically what they abhor. Um, I also think one of the things I do is talk to people about what past energies, lusts best explain their form. And if they choose to pursue these studies and sciences, that they can develop themselves. So in many ways, what I want to do with the term like necromancer is kind of associated with something like high school counselor.
Mhm, mhm,
So I
mhm,
think part of my agenda goal with this science is reform it into something that has a practical societal value. And not to say that other people won't be doing these things, but I think when it comes to helping others and like having like it would just be like another kind of astrologer or a numerologist. It's just another, you know, medical desk,
mhm.
you know,
Okay, so
profession.
if I'm interpreting this correctly, you see this as another way to heal people and heal the planet and heal the world and that kind of thing, which if you take that interpretation, then it is in line with religion, because that's kind of the same kind of thing. Is that correct?
Well, I would say religion has a different type of fundamental goal, but I would say definitely from the Christian perspective, what Christ is about is self-accountability. I think that's a big, which is I think is a very important message of Godhead, of the supreme Godhead. And I think, at least in one sense, what I'm talking about is, I think, part of the proper way of living, I think, as a human, is to address these lusts that are in us and neutralize them so they do not continue to go on and plague the world of energies we live in. And I think that is the idea of addressing sin is a very Christian. But I think other societies talk about this too. Like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, to me sounds like a book you say to someone when they're dying, so their body, because it's 500 to 700 trillion volts of electricity from the cells. It's a lot of energy. So when you're dying, you could be freaking out and putting that bad energy in the world. You get some of that stuff to calm down.
Okay, brilliant. So that makes sense. So, but do you, by doing this kind of stuff, do you, is there an element of risk? Like, are you?
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah. So like, because I've read a few books on magic. This was very many years ago, and the stuff that I got from them is you need a very high level of discipline and focus and concentration, that even the slightest mistake can cause a dark entity to cause a lot of damage. So like, how important is that, the discipline side and the potential dangers, like, not anybody should be practicing this kind of stuff. That's the feeling that I get. I mean, from my religious background, like, nobody should be practicing this, but obviously people do. But if you are going to practice it, my understanding is you need a lot, and I mean a lot of discipline and focus and dedication.
I think it's funny because I would agree that's true, but what I specifically do work with is largely in the world rather than bringing it from somewhere else,
Okay.
which I think is why the discipline mentally is so important, is because you're basically transporting something specifically through the mechanisms of your body and your mind. In my case, I would say, since things are already in the world with me, I don't have to do this transporting process that requires so much
Right.
of my body. Not to say that I can't get like I got a face shot once and I had to go, like, a spider bit me and then it got infected and I was knocked out, but it's a it's called a face shot, or sometimes they call it a witch shot or an elf shot. And it first appears as a prick, like you feel like, ow, I got poked by something. And they can be very serious. Um, uh, I've also been reckless with crystals, and I've hurt myself with that. So just because and most people would say crystals are harmless. It's like, well, you can still do stuff. You can still be done with them, and you can modify them and then be reckless with the modified versions. There are still real world consequences. Just like if you work in electrical engineering, there's going to be real world consequences if you're not careful. So it's like any other applied skill.
Brilliant. And I'm conscious of the time, but I do really want to touch upon the brief exchange that we had on Twitter the other day. So one of the questions that I had for you that I want to talk on this podcast is, how can you use all the stuff that we've talked about today in basically dealing with the mess that we find ourselves in the planet today. And you talked about it depends on mankind addressing how these problems are real. And you talked about psionic weapons. Can you just possibly go over that in a little bit more detail?
I think that um, from a practical perspective, is that when we change our views of health and we become more expansive with them, I think techniques that I offer, like for instance with my crystals and stuff, I'm very open source about this stuff because I don't think that's necessarily like if you want to learn how to do this and you can do it on your own, it'll take you time to get there, but um ultimately I think techniques like this lower healthcare options, specifically proactive healthcare choices, make people healthier, they can work more. It's very, mumbledy jumbly political stuff. But when you lower expenses for people, common people, they have more money to do other things. From a bigger world perspective, I think that self-determination, especially in economic marketplace like this, competition can be lethal, and you need to be able to defend yourself. And I think that um, there's this ideas about what's going on with Havana syndrome, and I've considered it's been new experimental malaria vaccines because it happened in Cuba, but it's been going on for a while, and um, basically the idea that the Russians or the Chinese are talking to modern Cubans and letting them be around their special lasers or whatever sound weapons is less likely than like voodoo people in Cuba doing something to Americans.
Mhm.
Like it's a cost difference. Like for instance, like imagine how much money one would have to get for actual laser things to hurt Americans. Oh, you can just get a chicken and just feed a chicken to something and it goes and messes with the Americans and the Americans can't do anything about it. Like it's just it's such a this is how and the thing is this is not going to just apply to Americans. I'm sure this is applied. I mean, I'm sure people try to make it rain in China all the time. Um, this means of warfare, how inexpensive it can now be, changes the game. You can suddenly harass people or landscapes for at the individual level. Um,
Because just to clarify that for the audience, and so what you're saying basically is, this crystals and in this skill that you've got with crystals and healing, that is
mm,
a lot cheaper than what's pushed by big pharma at the moment, whether it's vaccines, whether it's drugs and everything else. The point is this crystal healing is a lot cheaper, it's a lot more accessible, and a lot more safe. And in other words, people can become a lot healthier faster. Whereas the big pharma and the industrial complex, that's all about keeping people unhealthy and depressed and that kind of thing.
mhm. Well, I don't think it's just specifically my techniques. I think a lot of people can produce. There's a lot of people who are in the healing scene. I'm
Mhm.
by no means um uh I would even say the best. What I'm trying to do is being the most industrious. I'm coming up with these designs. I'm sharing these designs with people. They can replicate them on their own. I'm being very open source about it. I have various ideas about not only healing, but the idea of remote projecting healing to people. Like, for
Right.
instance, the person who I'm working with autoimmune disease, she, lives hundreds of miles away. And I have another person who is in Europe who I'm helping. That's on the other side of the world. I'm in California. So it's the idea of one of the ideas that I'm trying to help with in terms of, witch-accelerationism is magic at this point is a cottage industry, but we can industrialize it.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
think that in a way also impacts the whole situation.
Mm-hmm. And just finish on that point then. So what exactly are psionic weapons, and how do you protect yourself against them, or how do you use them, or what is it?
Um, I think the most common way people might be exposed to a psionic weapon or a psionic attack is actually through pictures
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
people or looking at people, making eye contact with people. But this is a hard way to live to avoid all of that. So I think the best way to go about living in the world is you have to learn how to clean yourself. Um, Various religions have techniques for this. Usually, I think, you know, because I think a lot of technique within ritual and prayer and things like that, it's prayer. So I think there are ways to go about devising prayer in a way that can clean you. And if you get something particularly nasty, you can always talk to an expert. And there's a lot of those people around.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So just
I'm
for
actually the
those
only
that,
person.
just sorry to put in there, but just for those that have never heard of this concept before, like what exactly do you mean by a psionic weapon? Like what does it mean?
I would say it refers to some sort of conscious-based weapon, whether it be from a human mind or a worldly entity that's not human, like a disembodied intelligence, or a higher intelligence that exists in a higher dimension. Um, Somehow expressing a vibrational frequency that can cause harm. And I mean, this is why the Havana syndrome is all largely conscious, like brain based. Like we have physical evidence of brain damage
Mm-hmm.
done to this. Well, since it's the brain nervous system is definitely a sensory organ for understanding consciousness. This is why it's going to take the brunt of the damage from consciousness based weapons, whatever that might necessarily be in this Havana syndrome, because I don't think they're using direct energy weapons in the ways that people are complaining that they felt the experience of it happening.
Okay, so is it in your opinion that these psionic weapons have been used on a mass scale to the global population, with what's been happening over the last year and a half? Obviously, we don't need to mention the words because we know what's been happening. Is it your opinion that this is what's really going on behind the scenes, that we're in some kind of spiritual war, and we need to protect ourselves from this psionic attack?
I think a lot of stuff in the past is largely a symbolic show as opposed to something that's directly designed to be painful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think there has definitely been an escalation in things. Um, and I think it's escalating more, but I don't think in the last, I would say things were different 5 years ago. Things were different 3 years ago. And I don't want to say, um, and things in ways, I feel like 2014 was way more chaotic than it was now. And I feel like things in some ways are quieter.
Mm,
Um,
okay.
um, Not to say that, but it's in the spiritual aspect. I mean, the physical aspect, like there's, you can talk about the behavior of certain governments and things like that, but that's way different. Like the astro world thing, Like they were doing crazier things a couple years ago, and you know, 9/11 was insane. So like and then the cathedral, Notre Dame happened in 2017. Like way crazier things have happened in terms of the spiritual spectacle, terrorism that's happened than bad things happen at a concert.
So, what do you think then is the end? Like, whoever's doing this, what is the end goal here, or what? Do you see an agenda happening over the next 5 to 10 years, or is just all just random things happening and different people trying to exert different will? What is your take on the thing as a whole, macro?
People have all these ideas about what's going on, agendas and theories, and I think the best way to understand what's going on, because there's always multiple people, even if you believe in the idea that they're all evil and they all work for one single organization, that people have different desires and they
Yeah.
want to do different things. And I think the best way to understand this kind of situation is understand people are competing for knowledge and they're competing for power. And this tool, this technology is an aspect for this. And in many ways, they're not sharing with each other. So they have to figure out a lot of this stuff on their own. And, some people have more knowledge and power than others. And I think a lot of their knowledge is really sense gratification related rather than like power. But that's power in its own way. It's like a drug, and you can do a lot with drugs, but there's limited elements to what power is if you've only have drugs to sell. So, and I think that's what they do. I think it's a big element. But I think one of the things Christ did was he said, here's how we change things. We heal people. And that's what I like. Not to say that I don't look into other things, but I think the most revolutionary method we have is healing and self-accountability.
Brilliant. Love it. Love it. And I think that's a great note to end on. So I found this very insightful. I just want to thank you for your time. Thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom. So just to finish up, like, how can people contact you, find out more about you, and how can you help them?
I'm on Twitter at Black Pope Vice. The BPV are all capitalized. You can just message me on there. I'm also on Instagram. I have the same avatar. I'll answer on Instagram, but that's not really my main thing. And if you're just interested in research and you're not interested in any sort of commentary or anything, like if you're just in for the industrialism, I have a Telegram channel. You can just message me and I'll send you the Telegram channel. And anytime I do research, you can just get to that stuff. One of the things I'm working on is on brain healing. I don't have a mind's eye, so I can't close my eyes and like daydream and see things.
Right.
I've been working on healing that. So like if you want to read about that kind of stuff or other sort of just pure healing stuff, that's optional. That's an option too. So yeah, just message me and I'll get you to wherever you need to go.
Brilliant. And as always, I will drop the links to some of those profiles in the comments below or in the comment section if you're listening on the podcast. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. Once again, Black Pope Vice, thank you for your time. As for the viewer, I will see you in the next episode. Take care now.
Thank you so much.